The missing person posters started appearing before anyone went missing. At first, we thought it was some kind of mistake, even a childish prank. But then we started recognizing the faces. Sarah from the coffee shop, Oliver who walks his dogs every morning. People who are still very much alive, still going about their daily routines. Completely unaware, their faces were plastered on telephone poles and trees, with the word missing on them. The dates on the posters were always exactly 7 days in the future. And 7 days later, without fail, they would vanish. No trace, no explanation, just empty spaces where people used to be. This is just one type of story that you might hear by Michael Alexander on Strange Tales and Unusual Circumstances, where the impossible becomes inevitable and the ordinary becomes terrifying. Some stories are too strange to ignore. This second strange tale I present, titled Hunger. You are the jury. Is Matthew himself to blame, or was this unusual circumstance the work of something more, something malevolent that possessed him to do it? Listening discretion is advised.
Hunger, by Michael Alexander. The pair of perforated tables in the mortuary awaits its next contact with the dead. This is the only reason for their existence. It won't be long now. The transfer van has just arrived. Soon enough, the room will once again reek of embalming fluid. Entering is a man wearing a suit and tie. He transports the body on a gurney confined in a cadaver pouch. Proceeding to the body fridge, the mortician preserves what's inside. Exiting empty-handed, the man once again leaves the room, returning minutes later with a second body bag. However, this one's placed on the stainless steel table. Pulling down the zipper, the mortician's nostrils absorb the scent of deodorizer mixed with body decay. Once the bag's opened, it reveals the naked and mutilated body of a man. Stitches run in a Y pattern from the shoulders to the navel. By his appearance, one would assume he's homeless. Whistling, the mortician leaves the vicinity, disappearing behind the walls of his office located at the back of the room. The room is silent, and only the faint sounds of the mortician's whistles echo through the confines. Slowly, the head of the deceased turns. With every movement, the stiffened muscles caused by rigor mortis crack and snap. His milky white eyes peer directly in your path. His lower jaw drops. His mouth is wide open, though he doesn't speak a word or make a sound.
Pardon me for my appearance. I know that a middle-aged man's naked cadaver lying on a medical examiner's table with a severed arm and his hair unkempt isn't too appealing. To answer your question, no, you're not going crazy, and yes, I am speaking to you telepathically from beyond the grave. What the police investigators concluded about this case isn't what actually happened, though it can easily be perceived that way. It may be hard for you to even believe that this story's true, but sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Just over 2 months ago, and right before the pulsating beeps from a heart monitor interrupted my unconscious state, I was dreaming. The soothing melodies from the chirping birds fill the quietness of the dense wilderness. I listened to the harmonization while riding a bicycle on a dirt path that cuts through the wooded area. The sun shines through the branches, glistening off the variety of vibrant greens and different textures of browns that the forest provides. I knew I was dreaming. Still, there's a sense of tranquility that comes over me. Abruptly, the birds stop their music, and dark clouds fill in the blue sky, casting shadows throughout the beautiful scenery. At a rapid pace, the plantation shrivels up, transforming nature into a bare and sinful wasteland. Spotting a clearing with a building up ahead, I go to investigate. The peaceful presence I felt is no longer there. Now, I was overwhelmed with fear. Even though I'm scared, I'm curious to see what lies ahead, so I continue onward, pedaling faster. However, the closer I get, the further the structure retracts. Finally, I find myself straddling my bike only several yards away. My heart races while fixated on a shanty that has an old, wooden, post and rail style fence rotted beyond repair. Large beige objects dangle from the roof's edge as if they were on display. They look to be deer, though I'm still too far away to know exactly what they are. Approaching the area, a sight so gruesome stops me dead in my tracks. Littered within the yard and beyond the fencing are human bodies in different stages of decomposition. The objects that I assumed to be deer suspended from butcher's hooks aren't what I perceived them to be either. They're human torsos, eviscerated. All the other extremities are nowhere to be found. Standing in disbelief, the dim creaking noise from a door opening catches my attention. Appearing in the shanty's doorway is a man in his 50s. He's wearing a tattered and old trucker's hat that hides his unkempt hair. In a pair of grungy, bibbed coveralls, he's silent, staring at me. Through his straggly beard, there's a toothless grin from ear to ear. This awkward and frightening moment seemed to last an eternity before I was outside of my body. Now, looking through the eyes of the man staring back at me when I was a teenager, the horrific imagery that stands before me disintegrates as the noise from the monitor becomes clearer. My eyelids flutter as the discharge that had fastened them closed loosens. A heart monitor, wires, and intervenes are attached to me as I lie in a bed. Clearly, by observing my environment, I was in a hospital, the critical care unit to be exact. I was too tender to move. Glancing at the bandage wrapped around my arm, the memory that I was in a workplace accident returns. My arm was pulled into the machine, and before losing consciousness, there was so much blood and excruciating pain. Recounting the unfortunate event, I'm visited by a nurse.
Hello, Mr. Goodman. How you feeling?
Looking at her with a blank stare, she waited for me to respond. There's a long pause before she spoke again.
You are Matthew H. Goodman, am I right?
I think she was talking to me, but for a brief moment, that name didn't sound familiar. With a weak head gesture, I replied, keeping to myself the other name that came to mind. Continuing to ask a few more questions, she then gave me the news.
Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful in saving your arm. It was too badly damaged. Thankfully, a compatible donor came just in time.
It was on a Wednesday that I was ultimately discharged. By the following day, my new self began to manifest. It started simply with things that could easily go unnoticed. Standing in the rain, I hailed a cab. When the driver asked me where I was going, I hesitated. 2 different addresses came to mind. One was unfamiliar to me. Giving the man my right place of residence, I returned home. The following morning, I woke up with an insatiable hunger. However, I was indecisive about what I wanted. By late morning, there's a knock at my door. Still finding myself uncertain of what I'm craving, I knew this was the nurse. I was told by the doctors that for the next little while, she'll be visiting me 3 times a day to change my dressings and to check on my progress. For some reason, I was overwhelmed with rage while she did her routine examination. It took every ounce of energy that was inside me to control the violent impulse that was growing. Every minute she was there, I had to resist bouncing from my seat and choking the life out of her. This malevolent urge I was experiencing had me in a state of shock. I'm not a violent person. By that same afternoon, the hunger had come back. But this time it came on more intensely. Pickled eggs, cheap brandy, and red meat, mainly beef and pork, were amongst the cravings. These unusual items I didn't have. This was out of my character. I didn't drink alcohol, and for the past 20 years I've lived a vegan lifestyle, needing to fulfill my unusual hunger. I took a trip to the grocery store. Arriving home, I could hardly get through the door. I spontaneously ripped open a package of ground beef, smelling it. The aroma was like an aphrodisiac, sending a tingling sensation throughout my body. Unable to contain myself, I take a handful of the meat, squeezing it in my hand. Then I found myself shoving my face into the ground-up animal. By Monday, my life was in complete chaos. My facial and scalp hair was growing at a rapid pace. My teeth ached to the point where I was able to remove one of my upper incisors. The place I call home is in disarray. Empty brandy bottles litter the floor and table surfaces. The odor of rotting food filled the air as flies fed on the remaining remnants from the collection of dirty dishes and old meat packages piling on the countertops. My malicious intent towards the nurse hadn't left. If anything, it grew stronger. For her own safety, I began avoiding her scheduled visits. I needed to remember the name that came to mind at the hospital. Convinced there was some type of connection between the sudden changes in my character and him. For the life of me, I couldn't recall it, though. At least the address from my cab ride had re-entered my train of thought. Thinking this address may be able to satisfy my unanswered questions, I took a drive. From the minute I left to the time I arrived in the rural area at the edge of Cardiff, Alabama, I knew exactly where to go. Traveling on a remote roadway that cuts through a section of dense forestry, there's a striking resemblance to what was envisioned in my dream and the scenery that surrounded me. Arriving at the long-abandoned location, it felt as if I were home. A sense of sadness was felt as I looked at the farmhouse directly in view. Jarred beyond restoration, much of the wood framing is exposed. Actually, all of the buildings that resided on the property met their fate by fire. Determined to find answers, I canvassed the grounds, rounding the corner towards the rear, just on the other side of the stalls where the animals were housed, but now excavated, evidently by the large holes and piles of discarded dirt left behind. The cabins noticed. This was exactly what I dreamt about, every detail, including the weathered post and rail fencings similar. The only exception, there are no suspended or swaying torsos from the roof, no decomposing bodies, or the bubbled and scorched wood from the blaze. Moving nearer, several rusty hooks used for hanging meat are found near the building's foundation. Leaning down to examine the metal, upon contact, the phantasmagoria of horror in the form of limbless and disemboweled bodies decorate the roof's edge like ornaments. Rising back to my feet, out of the corner of my eye, the unmarked entrance to the shelter is ajar. I can't refrain from entering. Walking through the door, I envision, but only for a brief second, the interior of the building before the fire. The imagery seen in the quick flashes was disturbing. Lining the back walls were a variety of tools that hung over a series of metal troughs. Piled high within the space are stacks of rotting pig carcasses. Glancing around the room, several workbenches and machinery used for processing animal meat are fastened to the tabletops. At the back, several doors leading to more rooms were noticed. Leaving my vision, the only observation now was the piles of ash and charred debris that didn't burn up in the fire. Creeping into the space, something heavy falls onto the floor behind me. Looking down, I notice a small hawkbill hunting knife at my feet. The object is pristine, not a speck of soot on it. Concluding that the weapon must have fallen from the door frame's ledge, I pick it up. A burst of energy soars through my body as it lies flat in my palm. Opening the knife, there were tiny traces of blood that stained the metal. From what remained was a mystery, continuing to ogle the odd shape of the blade. I'm startled by a dark figure of a man casting off the stainless steel. Slowly, He walked left to right, disappearing into another room. Swiftly I turned, but nobody was there. Arriving home that evening, I sat in my chair, drinking brandy straight from the bottle. In a hypnotizing manner, I admired the item found at the farm. In the background, the nightly news recites breaking stories from that day.
In other news, the DNA of 15 other Jane and John Does has finally been identified by their bone fragments found on the property of Oliver Templeton.
The woman news anchor had my attention. That was the name of the man I've been trying so hard to remember. Looking away from the blade, I can't believe what I see. The woman's voice faded as a deafening, high-pitched ringing took its place. In the top right corner of the screen was the man from my dream. Unable to hear what she's saying, I sprang from my seat, nearly falling over the trash and empty bottles that littered the floor while I made my way to the computer. I became beside myself from what was read. Oliver Templeton was also known as the Cannibal of Cardiff. The Alabama pig farmer, his wife, and their farmhands were a secret self-proclaimed cult, referring to themselves as the Congregation. The group of cannibals believed that if they consumed their victims, they would enhance their own characteristics. Allegedly, if they ingested the internal organs, that particular body part would rejuvenate their own. Oliver had an acquired taste for skinning and eating his victims raw, while the others preferred the meat cooked. Spanning over 30 years, their crime spree claimed the lives of an estimated 300 people. Evidence collected at the property suggested that the remains of their victims were fed to the livestock, concealing any signs of their presence. Oliver was clinically insane, and eventually, by ignoring his doctor's advice, it caught up with him. One afternoon, he became so deranged that he spiked all 10 of his followers, including his wife, with a powerful sedative. Incapacitated, they were hung by their ankles over the troughs. He proceeded to slit their throats, draining them of their blood. He would go on to dismember and preserve them for consumption. Later, Oliver finally made a mistake that led to his capture. A 16-year-old boy, while riding his bike, was abducted. Eventually, he escaped and alerted the authorities. Contained in the article was a portrait of the survivor. The similarities between the two of us sent chills down my spine. Searching the property, police discovered the disemboweled torsos of his farmhands and wife, hanging from meat hooks. Their limbs and heads had also been removed. During the investigation, human meat patties and sausage links were amongst other edible concoctions found stored within a deep freezer. Days after confessing to the heinous crimes, the people of Jefferson County revolted. The community of 55 people marched to the farm, determined to erase the reminder of what had taken place spanning over 3 decades. Using torches, gasoline, and fire bombs, they burned down the property, contaminating any DNA of unknown victims and evidence in the process. Oliver Templeton was finally put to death 15 years after his incarceration. Ironically, it was on the same day that my accident happened, and coincidentally I woke up from surgery with a new arm. Sitting in disbelief at my desk, continuous thoughts arose, wondering if there's any unexplained phenomena or reports from transplant recipients out there. I did a search. What was found astonished me. There had been hundreds of cases reported from around the world about this strange occurrence. People's diets had changed, and foods they didn't enjoy before surgery they now liked. Amongst many other character traits, others established talents and interests they never had. With all these unusual cases, I couldn't help but think that this was exactly what was happening to me. However, on a much larger and serious scale, By Wednesday and a week after my discharge, my mysterious impulse had become so unbearable that I felt as if I needed to act on it to bring me back to an even plateau. There was still a part of me contained inside. Well, so I thought. The nurse, like every other day, arrived on time. Not a minute before or a minute later. I tried so hard not to answer the door, but my body was under a complete invasion. All of my humanity had vanished. Still, there's a voice inside my head telling me not to do it, but with him in control, I couldn't resist. Smiling, I greet the woman. Up at entry, an expression of disgust came upon her face as she witnessed the condition of my home. Sitting in my chair, I, or should I say Oliver, waited patiently for the chance to act on the impulse. Turning her back to sift through her medical bag for the supplies needed, I lunged from my chair with the hawkbill knife in hand, repeatedly thrusting it into her body, watching the life dissipate from her eyes. I bend down, feeling the texture of her blood as it pools and soaks into the carpet around her. Scooping the bodily fluid into my hands, I started drinking it. The blood's texture as it filled my mouth and dripped down the back of my throat made me feel so alive. Just thinking about it now makes my mouth start to water. The sensation felt from ingesting the nurse's blood was unlike anything felt before, immediately killing the hunger inside. However, in time, it returned with a vengeance. A thick trail of red stained the carpet as the woman's body was dragged down the hallway towards the garage. Passing by a mirror momentarily, I glanced in its direction. In the reflection, it's no longer me. It's Oliver Templeton with his toothless smile grinning from ear to ear. Over the next few days, my mind became suppressed. Finally, when a small piece of me found its way back through the abyss, I observed the decaying and mutilated body of the nurse beside me. The body, cold to the touch. My retention returned as soon as I made contact, allowing me to revisit something that couldn't be unseen. Replaying the incident recorded in my mind, I get a glimpse of myself squatting in a Neanderthal-like posture in a dark corner of the garage, removing long, thin layers of her skin. Admiring the organic material, my head shudders as I cock it from side to side. My perception vividly recalls the smell having a distinct odor, almost sour. The texture is much like beef but a little softer. The taste, similar to pork or well-developed veal but much sweeter, sickened to my stomach. I know what I needed to do. Reclaiming a half bottle of strong pain medication from the bathroom cupboard, I swallow 3 times the daily dosage. Now back in my chair, I patiently waited for the narcotics to take hold. I visualized what was about to happen next, my heart consistently pounding while my hands nervously trembled. Not long after, the drugs began to take effect. Intensified by the excessive drinking, I leave my seat lumbering like a sluggish monster from a George Romero movie, back towards the garage door. On the workbench, my mounted circular saw rests, the lights shining on it as if it were some type of holy relic. If you haven't guessed by now, I was about to use the machine to cut off Oliver's arm. The point of detachment was exactly where it was attached, visible by my fresh scar and the line of sutures. Turning my belt into a tourniquet, I tied it tightly just below the elbow. Blood and arm fragments project on impact, painting the walls, ceiling, and me red. The teeth from the rotating blade tore through the tendons, muscle, and flesh as it separated me from the evil within. Stumbling back, I looked at the amputation while keeping it elevated, the remaining blood draining out onto the floor, while the shredded tissue dangled loosely from the fresh stump. Falling unconscious until the following morning when I finally awoke, The insatiable hunger, the violent impulses and odd cravings that I had were no longer there. I actually thought my psychotic idea worked until I noticed the severed arm lying on my lap. The skin was stripped right down to the bone, with visible teeth impressions everywhere. Having no recollection at that moment of how the severed limb ended up on me, or why the detached appendage was missing most of its skin, I knew that my self-inflicted dismemberment failed. It would be late into the afternoon when the hunger returned. It was quite obvious that my newly wicked desires wouldn't ever stop unless I made the ultimate sacrifice. Deciding to commit mankind's worst sin, I decided to take my own life by mixing the rest of the painkillers and the 2 bottles of brandy I had left. It would be days later when my body would be discovered by the police alongside what's left of the decomposing body of the nurse. So you can see how this could easily be mistaken. Clearly I was a victim myself. However, nobody will ever know that truth. They'll only know the facts from the case that I murdered and performed acts of cannibalism on my victim, tainting my name. This story, my story, won't ever be told. It'll become another unexplained event where the circumstances surrounding the case are never known. There'll only be theories, leaving many unanswered questions. All we can do is hope and pray that Oliver Templeton's cannibalistic hunger isn't manifesting through someone else.
The man becomes quiet as the mortician returns. Now wearing an apron and gloves, the mortician's ready to make the necessary preparations for funeral services. Proceeding to retrieve his tools needed, the head of the man slowly returns to its rightful position. He's ready for the preservation of his own vessel. Hopefully now his soul can rest in peace. The end.